Had it not been for Paul, I wouldn't have been in the film. It just wouldn't have happened. It was very generous for a guy to take that kind of a chance. And then once he was in, they changed the title. Once he's going to play Butch Cassidy, it's Butch Cassidy in the Sundance Kid.
In the fading light of his later years, Robert Redford sits quietly. No cameras, no scripts, no stage direction. Just a man looking back at a lifetime that often felt larger than the silver screen. His voice carries that familiar warmth.
Your girl is lovely, Hubble. Why don't you bring her for a drink when you come?
I can't.
A little slower now, but still filled with the same reflective honesty that made audiences believe every word he ever said. When asked once what he learned from working with Paul Newman, Redford smiled softly before answering. He's a very honest man, and a very generous man. Those are the two things that hit me. It was more than a tribute. It was a confession of gratitude, of admiration, of brotherhood. Because for Robert Redford, Paul Newman wasn't just a co-star. He was the man who stood up for him when no one else did. When we worked on Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, the studio didn't want me, Redford recalled. They said I wasn't well known enough. But Paul said, "Let's go with this guy." Had it not been for him, I wouldn't have been in the film. That moment, quiet but monumental, changed both their lives forever. One star was already shining. The other was just beginning to rise. Together, they would become legends, not because Hollywood made them so, but because they found in each other something deeper than fame: trust. Today, we revisit the story of that trust. A friendship born on a dusty movie set and carried through decades of laughter, mischief, and mutual respect. This is not just the tale of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. It's the story of two men who became brothers in silence and stayed that way until the end, when the studio said no. It was 1968, and Hollywood was a different world. One built on names, faces, and box office power. Paul Newman had all three. He was already the man of the hour. Blue-eyed charm, box office gold, and a reputation that could make or break a film. And then there was Robert Redford, talented, magnetic, but still an outsider. When Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid went into production, the studio had one clear instruction: no unknowns. They wanted a safe choice, another familiar face beside Newman. Redford, fresh from a few small films, didn't fit that image. He was the risk the studio refused to take. Redford would later recall that painful chapter with quiet honesty. The studio did not want me because I was not well known like he was. Paul was a pretty well-known guy, and I'd just done a couple of films. It sat with the director George Roy Hill, the writer William Goldman, and Paul, who I had never met, to approve me against the studio. In that moment, his fate rested in the hands of three men. Hill believed in him. Goldman liked his energy. But it was Newman who made the choice that changed everything. He looked at the young actor, saw something the studio didn't, and said simply, "Let's go with this guy." That one sentence wasn't just a professional endorsement. It was an act of faith, a veteran reaching out to an unknown and saying, "I see you." From that moment, a bond was born. A bond that would carry them through decades of friendship and mutual respect. Redford would later say, "Had it not been for Paul, I wouldn't have been in that film. It just wouldn't have happened." The decision defied the studio, rewrote casting history, and forged a partnership that would become one of the most legendary duos in cinema. But beyond all that, it marked the beginning of something far more enduring: trust between two men who didn't need to say much to understand each other. As the cameras rolled and the world fell in love with Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, no one could have imagined the quiet loyalty that began in those casting meetings, a loyalty that would outlast fame, fortune, and even life itself. The day Butch met Sundance. Before the world knew them as outlaws, they were just two actors meeting for the first time. One already a household name, the other a quiet talent trying to find his place. Paul Newman, at the height of his fame, carried an easy confidence. Robert Redford, in contrast, arrived with humility and that trademark calm intensity that would later define him. They met not under bright lights, but in quiet corners, through conversations, curiosity, and shared instincts. Redford once recalled, "I didn't know Paul. I hadn't met him. I was the new guy, the risk. But he didn't treat me that way. He treated me like a partner from the start. From that first exchange, something clicked. There was no ego, no tension, just a sense of playfulness, a spark that would light up every scene they shared. Newman's humor was effortless, Redford's timing instinctive. Together, they didn't just perform, they belonged to the same rhythm." Director George Roy Hill noticed it instantly. He later said that when Redford and Newman walked onto a set, the atmosphere changed. "It wasn't acting," he said. "It was chemistry." But behind that chemistry was understanding. Newman saw a bit of himself in the younger actor. That same quiet rebellion, that same refusal to play by Hollywood's rules. Redford, meanwhile, saw in Newman a man who carried fame lightly, who made kindness look effortless. In one of his interviews, Redford smiled, remembering those early days. "We started talking, laughing, and then working together just felt easy. It didn't feel like we were making a movie. It felt like we were creating something bigger, a friendship." As Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid took shape, the magic between them became impossible to ignore. Every look, every smirk, every line exchanged on screen felt alive, because it was. It wasn't just performance. It was trust captured on film. That was the day Butch met Sundance, not as characters, but as kindred spirits. And though neither of them could have known it then, they were beginning a partnership that would outlast every film they ever made, the outlaw spirit. For Robert Redford, playing the Sundance Kid wasn't just another role. It was something personal, almost spiritual. While others saw it as a charming outlaw part, Redford saw a reflection of his own life. The quiet rebel, the dreamer who never fit neatly into Hollywood's rules. Originally, Redford once said, "They approached me to play Butch Cassidy because I'd done a comedy on Broadway. But I told George Roy Hill, that's not the character that interests me. The one I identify with is the other guy, the Sundance Kid." They met in a bar on 3rd Avenue to talk about it. Just two men, 2 drinks, and a script that would soon make cinematic history. As Redford remembered, "I said to George, I think I've always had a slight outlaw sensibility. That's who I am. I feel more connected to that character." That one conversation changed everything. Director George Roy Hill, intrigued by Redford's honesty, began to see the story differently. The script was even retitled, originally The Sundance Kid and Butch Cassidy, before the studio reversed it once Newman was confirmed for the lead. But what mattered most wasn't the order of the names. It was the bond forming between the two men behind them. Redford and Newman understood the outlaw spirit in each other. Both were rebels in their own ways. Newman, the Hollywood darling who hated fame's shallow side, and Redford, the quiet outsider who wanted art to mean something more. On screen, that energy became electric. Redford played Sundance with restraint, charm, and quiet power. Newman's Butch radiated confidence and warmth. Together, they brought something rare. Two men who weren't competing for the spotlight, but sharing it. In a later reflection, Redford said it best, "I think I was born with a little rebellion in me." Paul understood that. He didn't try to change it, he let it be. That understanding became their greatest strength. Behind every smirk and every shared glance in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid was the mutual recognition of two men who had lived enough life to know that sometimes being an outlaw wasn't about breaking rules. It was about staying true to yourself. Laughter, tricks, and trust. For all the talk of chemistry and craft, what truly bonded Robert Redford and Paul Newman was laughter. Behind the cool stares and gunfights of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, there was an endless stream of jokes, pranks, and playful rivalry that only deepened their friendship. Redford once laughed, recalling, "Paul loved to mess with people. He was a prankster at heart, a little boy in a man's body." On set, Newman's humor was legendary. He once swapped out Redford's bike seat during a scene, leaving him nearly tumbling mid-shot. Another time, he quietly loosened the screws on Redford's chair just before an interview. The whole crew waited in suspense. And sure enough, when Redford sat down, the chair collapsed. Everyone burst into laughter. But Redford never stayed behind for long. His payback was subtle but clever. Newman's car mysteriously filled with confetti, his lunch replaced with raw onions, his shoes glued to the floor of his trailer. It became a game, not of competition, but affection. Each prank carried a message. "I know you. I trust you." That was the thing about Paul, Redford said later. He didn't mind being the butt of a joke, as long as it was funny. He respected humor because it kept everyone human. Their friendship thrived in that space between laughter and loyalty. Both men carried the weight of fame, yet they never let it turn them into strangers. Redford admired how Newman balanced success with humility, never losing his spark, never taking himself too seriously. He had this wonderful mischief, Redford remembered. He could make you laugh even when things weren't going right. I think that's why everyone loved him. He reminded us not to take life too seriously. That same humor bled into their performances, the teasing, the banter, the shared glances that made audiences believe they'd known each other for years. It wasn't scripted, it was real. And when the cameras stopped rolling, that laughter didn't fade. It followed them through decades, through new projects, family milestones, and even as time began to slow them both down. For Redford, those memories weren't about fame or films. They were about friendship, the kind that could only be built on laughter, tricks, and unshakable trust. The sting of success. When The Sting hit theaters in 1973, it wasn't just another film, it was lightning captured twice. 4 years after Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, Robert Redford and Paul Newman reunited, and the world couldn't get enough. But behind the smooth cons and dazzling confidence lay something far more genuine, a bond between two men who had learned to trust each other completely. By that point, both actors were icons. Newman, the blue-eyed star with a string of hits and a growing legend. Redford, the rising force of Hollywood, charismatic, careful, and quietly ambitious. Yet on set, there was no ego, no competition. Just two craftsmen meeting in perfect rhythm once more. It was like putting on an old glove, Redford said of their reunion. Everything just fit. We didn't even need to talk about it. We just knew what the other would do. That word, trust, defined them. Redford later admitted that in a business built on appearances, it was rare to find someone who truly meant what they said. But Paul Newman did. He was grounded, honest, and funny, in the most human way. During the filming of The Sting, Newman would often break the tension with his trademark grin and dry wit. When a complex scene dragged on for hours, he'd nudge Redford and whisper, "You think the audience will notice we're making this up?" Redford would smirk, fire back, "Only if you keep talking." The crew loved it. The energy between them was effortless, like a song they both knew by heart. That same spark made The Sting a masterpiece, a film about friendship disguised as a con game. It wasn't just the story that worked, Redford reflected later. It was us. Paul and I had that rare thing, chemistry you can't fake. The film won 7 Oscars, including Best Picture. Redford earned his first Academy Award nomination for Best Actor. Yet, even amid the applause, he downplayed his success. For him, the real reward wasn't the trophy. It was working beside his friend again. Paul never saw acting as competition, Redford said. He saw it as collaboration. That's what made him rare. Off-screen, their friendship deepened. They'd talk about family, art, and the absurdity of fame. Both valued their privacy, both lived far from Hollywood's noise, and both respected the life the other had built. In time, The Sting became more than a film. It became a symbol, not of money or glamour, but of a partnership built on respect, humor, and trust. Two men who didn't just act together, they believed in each other. Two men and time. In his later years, Robert Redford often spoke with a quiet reverence when the name Paul Newman came up. The sparkle in his eyes softened, and his tone changed. Not like a man remembering a co-star, but like one recalling a brother. In one interview, Redford leaned back, thoughtful, his voice low and sincere. "You don't get many friendships like that in this business. Most fade when the cameras stop rolling. Ours didn't. Ours lasted." It's rare in Hollywood, a world built on image and fleeting alliances, for two legends to stay bound by genuine affection and loyalty. Yet Redford and Newman did, across decades and miles, through fame, aging, and loss. Their friendship was never loud. It didn't need to be. They didn't show up at every party or pose for every photo. Instead, they sent quiet messages, played pranks from across the country, and checked in without fanfare. When Newman founded Newman's Own, Redford was among the first to support it. When Redford launched Sundance, Newman cheered him on. No envy, no pride, only respect. "Paul was one of the few people I could count on to tell me the truth," Redford once said. Not the Hollywood truth, the real truth. When Paul Newman passed away in 2008, Redford didn't rush to make statements or public tributes. Instead, he withdrew, reflective, private, letting his silence speak the depth of his loss. Later, when asked, he finally said, "There's a void now. I can't imagine a world without him." Those words, quiet yet heavy, carried decades of shared laughter, work, and trust. Redford knew that their story wasn't just about two actors who made history. It was about two men who found each other at the right time in life and never let that bond break. In many ways, Newman's presence never really left him. Even years later, Redford admitted that when he was on set or watching the sunset from his Utah ranch, he'd sometimes think, Paul would have loved this. Their friendship was timeless, not because of fame or films, but because it was built on something real in a world that rarely is. "He was my friend," Redford said softly. "That's the best thing I can ever say about anyone." And in those few words lies the heart of their story. Two men, two legacies, and one friendship that defied time itself. In the end, Redford didn't speak of Paul Newman like a star. He spoke of him like family. "He was my friend," he said quietly. "That's the best thing I can ever say about anyone." Their bond outlasted fame, awards, and even time itself. When Newman passed in 2008, Redford felt the silence of a world missing its brightest laugh. Yet he never mourned publicly. Instead, he honored his friend the only way he knew how, by remembering the laughter, the lessons, and the grace they shared. Two men, two legacies, one friendship that defined a generation. If their story touched your heart, subscribe and share, so their golden spirit and the truth of real friendship continue to shine through every frame of Hollywood history.